Welcome to the Not Old Better Show, Smithsonian Associates Interview series on radio and podcast. The show covering all things health, wellness, culture, and more. The show for all of us who aren't old, we're better. Each week, we'll interview superstars, experts, and ordinary people doing extraordinary things, all related to this wonderful experience of getting better, not older. Now, here's your host, the award-winning Paul Vogelzang.
Welcome to the Not Old Better Show, Smithsonian Associates Interview series on radio and podcast. I'm Paul Vogelzang, and today we open the curtain on two women who wore crowns but never bowed. Two empresses who stood at the center of 19th century Europe, glittering with power and beauty, yet haunted by betrayal, heartbreak, and war. Elisabeth of Austria and Eugénie of France. Names that may sound like fairy tale heroines, but whose lives were anything but. When they married into empire, they became icons of fashion and strength, idolized and scrutinized. But behind the velvet gowns and royal portraits were women at war with expectation, and often with their own families. Author, historian, and Smithsonian Associate Nancy Goldstone joins us to talk about her newest book, The Rebel Empresses, a sweeping, emotional account of two women who reshaped their worlds, not with armies, but with intellect, willpower, and undeniable presence. Nancy Goldstone's storytelling reminds us that history is never dry, it's lived. It's defiant. It's heartbreakingly human. This is more than a story about royalty. It's about resilience. It's about fighting to be seen even when the world prefers you to be silent. I'm Paul Vogelzang. Please join me in welcoming award-winning journalist and historian, Smithsonian Associate Nancy Goldstone. Please join me in welcoming Nancy Goldstone. Nancy Goldstone, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I really am excited to talk to you about this. Thanks so much for sharing the book. I've got it right here. I'm looking forward to The Rebel Empresses and a conversation with you about your upcoming Smithsonian Associates presentation. Why don't we start there and maybe just tell us briefly what you're going to tell us during your presentation and how you'll use Zoom. We're all on Zoom these days, so maybe tell us how you're going to engage us there.
Well, I have to say first, it's Tuesday, June 17th at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time, which is 3:30 Pacific Time, which is where I am. And I actually, it's wonderful to have a Zoom conversation because I have the most fabulous images, beautiful, beautiful images to show. And I also, it's so much easier to talk about this stuff when you see people's portraits and you know you have a face to look at, you understand who you're talking about, and and you need it in this because there are a lot of different moving parts, and you're going to want to know who everybody is and why they ended up where they were, kind of thing.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's helpful. I think the pictures will give us this idea of Elisabeth of Austria, Eugénie. That'll be so helpful to kind of see this. Why these two women? Because it's fascinating the way the story comes together, the way you've written this, but it really has a lot of bearing on kind of today, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But yet we're talking about 19th century Europe. So what led you here?
Right. Well, this is what I do. I am the person who writes about all the most important and influential women in European history who nobody's ever heard of. I've been doing it for decades, and I started in the 13th century. I went up through time, 13th century, 14th century, all the way up until I can hardly believe myself I'm in the 19th century. And in every period, and I always do them in order because it's very important to understand, to know what they knew. So you can't this isn't a 19th century. It's not a place you're just going to drop into and figure it out. You have to know what happened in all those other centuries because it's all building up on top of each other. For these, Empress Elisabeth and Empress. So I wrote about two empresses: Empress Elisabeth of Austria, who is more commonly known by her childhood nickname of Sisi. And the other one was Empress Eugénie of France. She was the wife of Napoleon III in the French Second Empire, another person who nobody has ever heard of. And the reason I started with Sisi and how I came to her was I was researching a book years ago. It was for a book like two books ago. I was in Prague. I went to the castle. I was researching about Elizabeth Stuart. She was the Winter Queen, and I went through the castle. And as I do afterwards, I was with my husband. We go walking outside the castle, and there's a little bookstore. And I always love to go into a bookstore in a foreign country, so I go in there, even though probably won't know any of the languages, but they have this little teeny American English section, and sitting out facing is a book with a portrait of a woman on it, and she's looks like a good fairy princess. She's in this unbelievable gown with these diamond stars in her hair, and I literally did a double take, and it's it's like a children's book. And I do a double take, uh, who is that? I'd never heard of her, nothing. And of course, I had to buy that book. When I found out she was I didn't think she was real, but she was. She was an empress. And I said, wow, I have to learn about her. And when first I started to research about her, then I said, oh, okay. Well, because another thing that I really have learned over the years of doing these books is it's not enough to do one person's biography. You have to follow, if you really want to understand what's going on, you have to follow that, whatever happened in that person's reign, into another, either through their children and see how it all played out, or find some other way to provide context. And now Sisi, her children, following them wasn't going to help. But I looked at, you can't do Austria in the 19th century without France. And I looked at France, and Eugénie just leapt out at me. This beautiful woman at the center of French glamour. And I said, okay, and in the center of all the politics. And they made such perfect foils for each other, because they're going through exactly the same thing, except on opposite sides. And it really was such a good way to look at that, I think, to provide insight.
Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful. I always love going into bookstores too. You never know what you're going to just find on a table or on a shelf or something like that. It's always just a joy.
Right.
And you kind of are alluding to this a little bit, but I want to talk to you for just a moment about how these women kind of defied some convention in their era, because both of them really, I think, were very unique people, and you really spell that out nicely. So for our audience that really loves history, tell us a little bit about how both of these women kind of reinvented and really had a very powerful effect on the times.
I'm not sure they reinvented, but they had very powerful effects on the time, and on the times, and also was so interesting that one side was more personal and the other was more political. So we can start with Empress Elisabeth. Sisi. She's the personal side. She's kind of their Princess Diana. All right. In Germany, she's the high-spirited beauty that defies the imperial family and goes on to totally eclipse them with her celebrity. And she has a very strong political effect, but she's actually not interested in politics. And she does it anyway. She has she has probably the major achievement. She actually has a better political achievement, a more substantive political achievement than Eugénie, but she's just this free-spirited soul who's trapped in a very conservative environment. And on the other side is Eugénie, and Eugénie, actually all she ever wanted was to do something. She's very intelligent. She has a great heart. But she cannot become a lawyer. She cannot become a doctor. Her rank and her position in life forces her only into marriage. And she very early, what I love about Eugénie is she very early on falls under the spell of a utopian socialist by the name of Charles Fourier, who had at the time what was a really fringe theory out there. But she just resonated with her. And the theory was that women should be given equal rights and opportunities to men, and that societies that actually gave equal rights and opportunities to women succeeded where those that didn't failed. And this was a very new, this is 20 years or, almost 30 years before the women's movement or the progress or anything like that. Eugénie, right from the very start, is a proponent of women, of helping women. When she becomes empress, she has education for women. She promotes education for women. She promotes higher education too for women. She thinks women should have skills so that they can work and they don't have to rely on a man. She pushes for women artists and writers and playwrights to be given the same recognition for their efforts. I mean, she was all on top of that right from the beginning. So you have to love her. So politically, she is way ahead of her time. And Sisi, by having so much tragedy in her life and so much difficulty, she kind of anticipates the women's movement in a much more personal way, but kind of like why do I have to get married in the first place kind of thing. That's Sisi.
There was very much this a notion I thought in throughout about this idea of personal autonomy and how that clashed with the times. Describe that.
Well, it's obviously they're very different. Sisi is in a situation. First of all, Sisi gets married she is engaged at the age of 15 to a man who's 23, who's supposed to be, I mean, it's a hilarious story. It's not hilarious, but I mean, that was one of the most fun parts is writing the engagement because he's supposed to marry her. He's been arranged that he will marry her 19-year-old age-appropriate sister. So her husband's Franz Joseph. He's Emperor of Austria. He's 23. He needs a wife. And his mother, who is running the country, the empire, arranges for him to marry a cousin of his who is 19. They're going to meet each other for the first time, and they're going to get 2 days to get to know each other, and then they're going to get engaged and married. And on the other side, the 19-year-old, who is Sisi's older sister, she's a little nervous about this, and so Sisi's mother takes Sisi along too because Sisi is only 15, but this will calm down the 19-year-old, and maybe one of Franz Joseph's younger brothers, might be interested at some point or whatever. And they get there, and Franz Joseph decides, which is the only disobedient thing this guy has ever done against his mother in his entire life up to that point. He decides he doesn't want the 19-year-old. He wants the 15-year-old because the 15-year-old is, she's so sweet. She's just like a little child. And, they're lucky they left the 11-year-old at home is all I can say. And so he very publicly ditches the 19-year-old in favor of the 15-year-old. And Sisi, she didn't even have the 2 days. She's got 1 day. And of course, you cannot, as her mother said, you don't send the Emperor of Austria packing. So she just has to say yes. And she is completely unprepared for anything that is coming at her. And she is not the sort of person who makes the kind of empress that Franz Joseph's mother wanted. And it's going to turn into just this epic battle because Franz Joseph sides with his mother for forever. And it takes Sisi a very long time to actually into her own. But boy, was it satisfying when you get to write what she does. And so Eugénie's the other side. Eugénie wants political power. She wants to do something. She marries a man who actually wants a partner. Napoleon III. So Eugénie, she marries Napoleon III, who's Emperor of the French. We don't know who Napoleon III is here, but we do know who he is. The nephew of the first Napoleon. The great Napoleon Bonaparte, the world conqueror, that guy.
Yeah,
So
that guy.
he's Napoleon I's nephew, and he needs a bride. Also, he takes over in France in 1852, and he needs a bride right away because he's in his mid-40s, and he's managed not to get married up to so far, and he needs a legitimate heir, which he's got the other kind, but he doesn't have a legitimate one. He's got to get married, and he picks Eugénie, and that actually turned out to be, she was a very helpful partner there because he even though his family hated her and thought he had married beneath them and worked against her the whole time, he supported her, where Franz Joseph did not support Sisi. So she does have political power, Eugénie. She gets to be regent. In fact, she gets so much political power that she makes a number of major mistakes.
What a remarkable window into the lives that history tried to polish into perfection or bury altogether. But as Smithsonian Associate Nancy Goldstone so beautifully reveals, behind the tiaras and titles were real women, flawed, fierce, and unforgettable. Their legacies remind us that true influence doesn't come from position alone, but from purpose. And maybe that's something we can all take with us, no matter our age or title. Please stay tuned for part 2 of our interview with Smithsonian Associate Nancy Goldstone, coming right up. Hi, this is Paul. Before we jump back into today's show, I want to take a moment to recognize a truly special milestone, Smithsonian Associates' 60th anniversary. Since 1965, Smithsonian Associates, the largest museum-based education program in the world, has been inspiring lifelong learners with unforgettable experiences, connecting audiences with the Smithsonian's museums, research, and experts in new and exciting ways. This year, the celebration is for you, with a full year of special programming both online and in person, from behind-the-scenes looks at Smithsonian collections to conversations with astronauts, historians, filmmakers, and curators. There's something for everyone. Smithsonian Associates has created something extraordinary. I'm proud to partner with Smithsonian Associates to share their incredible programs with the Not Old Better Show audience. Thanks for being part of this journey. Here's to 60 years of curiosity, learning, and discovery. Our guest is Smithsonian Associate Author Nancy Goldstone, and Nancy will be appearing at Smithsonian Associates coming up. Nancy is the author of several books. The most recent is The Rebel Empresses, Elisabeth of Austria and Eugénie of France. Fantastic book. I really recommend this for everybody. The book is getting great reviews. Nancy, I thought this one from the Wall Street Journal was so good. It says, elegantly written in a brisk style that plays to Goldstone's strengths in portraiture and theatrical set piece. Goldstone provides rich storytelling and humane and balanced portraits of her subjects. I like that a lot because these women were glamorous, but there was some tragedy to both. And I wonder what we don't know, what we misunderstand about both. Because they had these very public personas, yet they suffered privately.
They did. They both went through everything together, and they had their personal tragedies actually were the same. They both lost, for example, their sons, their only sons, and they Eugénie was actually run off of her position, but Sisi just didn't want it anymore. So they had a lot in common that way. But I think what's so interesting is, this is still so political in both Germany and France. And you can see it even in the article so Smithsonian Magazine actually wrote an article, had a journalist write an article about Empress Elisabeth Sisi. That's what, and it was written by a journalist, went around. She gave you the normal idea of what she gave you the standard approach to Sisi here. What we don't understand is, and this is why you don't. This is why I don't do just biography. I don't really do biography. A biographer is going to tell you, is going to look at every aspect of your subject's life, and he's going to tell you what she had for breakfast or not in case of Sisi, or, and what she did every day of her life and where she went and blah, 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 but it doesn't necessarily give you insight. I do narrative history, which is history told as a story with these two women as the principal characters in it. And I think it gives you a much fuller insight into it. So, for example, you don't understand, it's still so political that when you go to Vienna, for example, you go to the Sisi Museum, and the curator at the Sisi Museum was quoted in the Smithsonian article. And, they basically say, she was troubled and she was unhappy, Sisi, and all of this stuff. And then he says, I laughed out loud when I heard this line. He said, well, she was a woman who had everything in the world, so it's very hard to feel sorry for her. And that is the standard idea that is proponent is, and you have to laugh because that is exactly the argument the devil used with Faust. He said, I will give you everything in the world, you just give me your soul. And how did that work out for Faust? Sisi was, they really tried hard to crush her. I don't think I would have survived all the things that court did to someone who came in at 15 or 16 years old, and the degree of tragedy that she had to go through, and the pressure on her to change who she was, to conform, that would have broken me. And I think it broke Sisi, but she tried to put herself back. She got to kind of put herself back together again. And so that's why it's almost the same thing that we're doing here. What somebody's history looks like depends on who is writing the history. And the biographer, actually, the reason the biographer used in the Smithsonian Magazine article is the major German biographer. It's a biography called The Reluctant Empress by Bridget Hammond. And I read that biography, and I have to tell you, I have never in my life had a biographer that was so mean-spirited to her subject. There are so many times when I read in that biography, the book is all messed up in my house because I would throw it across the room in disgust at how she would take events and twist them, and how mean-spirited it was, and how and that's because she had a very political approach. She had a very political approach to it that was different. It's really like a Republican writing about a Democrat. When Republicans write about Nancy Pelosi, it comes out one way, and when the Democrats write about her, it comes out another. So you had a very, very pivotal figure, and even today, she is still so much. She's viewed as so much of a threat, I guess, that she is kept in this little box. So.
There's a lot going on, and certainly a lot going on in the 19th century. So many international incidents, and both women had leadership roles in some of that. I wonder which leadership role surprised you the most between the two?
Well, Eugénie wanted leadership roles, and Eugénie is responsible, and she learned all, but her problem was that she learned all of foreign affairs from her husband, Napoleon III. Napoleon III had he had a kind of foreign policy that I think we will all recognize today. He wanted to impose his worldview on the rest of Europe. He used threats. Did double dealing, and he thought he was the smartest guy in the room, and that's the person that Eugénie learned from. So, and this is the time of empire. So Eugénie is actually responsible for trying to take over Mexico, but she meant it in the nicest possible way, and only for the good of the people. So she recognized when she made errors, but she definitely exerted real power. Sisi had to keep her power Sisi had no power. She was given no power at the court. Her power came entirely from her soft power, which was what Sisi did, and that basically saved the empire as much as was left of it after Franz Joseph had done a number on it. She kept Hungary as part of the uh, Austrian Empire. And she negotiated it was the only time a political controversy or conflict between states was negotiated peacefully in the entire century, as far as I can see. She stopped them stopped Austria from trying to repress Hungary, and she got them and to come to a diplomatic arrangement. And that was only after 7 years of learning the language, of wearing the Hungarian clothes when it wasn't popular, of meeting the other side, of pressing and pressing and pressing. And she never gets any credit for it, but she did that. And they knew it in Hungary. So if for example, at the same time that this was happening between Austria and Hungary, Ireland was asking for home rule from Queen Victoria. Now, and they did not allow that. And as a result, and there was no negotiated settlement, and it was just shut down. And as a result, you can see all the problems that have come since then, that all that violence that came afterwards was because they were not able to come to a negotiated settlement the way Sisi helped Austria-Hungary do it. So today she'd have won the Nobel Peace Prize, but back then she is just a sad little figure going all around the world, kind of thing. That's why we need historians.
Yeah, right. And you explained this so well. The research is so impressive, Nancy Goldstone, and I want to talk about Eugénie for just a moment, because really for a long time, and I came to understand this from the book and my research of you, that Eugénie was nearly erased from history. Why do you think that happened? And what does that mean as we kind of look at France's, kind of role internationally at that time, as well as this subject of female power?
Oh, I think, she was erased because what happened was she and her husband usher in the French Second Empire, a period of utter fabulousness, where domestically they do all of this. They do so much for France, modernize it completely. Paris becomes the city that we all love and adore today because Napoleon III, he completely reconstructed it and put in sewers and widened the avenues and put in the parks and all of this. And Eugénie was the queen of fashion. She brought all the people in. There was a flowering of the arts. They put in the railroads. They put in science. It was a great time in that way. But internationally, when you think you're the smartest guy in the room and there turns out to be somebody a little smarter, you're going to lose. And the smartest person in the room was actually Otto von Bismarck from Prussia. And there is a war between France and Prussia just annihilates the French army. And that is when the empire falls, and Eugénie has to flee. And I have to say, another great part of this book, which I would never edit, is the person who saves the Empress of the French is her middle-aged expatriate American dentist. And why the American Dental Association does not put this guy on their website as a hero. He's just a hero. And they are missing a bet there, okay? But so she has to flee. And of course, the Prussians crushed the French. And so she is completely disreputed. The empire's disreputed is in disrepute because she and her husband feel brought it on and failed so miserably. But in fact, they had not wanted that war, and he had already started to give power over. So it has taken them all this time, the French, to kind of see. She's just now starting to come back into favor, Empress Eugénie, because all of the spectacle and everything that they love in France, you can draw a direct line from what they did in the Paris Olympics to that wonderful, the exuberance, the glamour, the culture, everything, that kind of spectacle, there's a direct line back to the French Second Empire. That is what Eugénie, those were the kind of parties she put on. That's what brought people to Paris. That's what made it because they wanted. That was what made it profitable. That's what brought in money. Their economy boomed. So I think we're just starting to see her get rehabilitated now.
Mm-hmm. That's a really interesting way to put it. I hadn't connected the French Olympics there, but that's wonderful. Really, really very impressive.
If you followed fashion, you would see that all her crinolines are coming back into style.
Okay. If you've brought them to life so well in the book, and then here talking to us today, what do you think that they would say, both of them, Elisabeth and Eugénie, about monarchies today, as well as how far women leaders have come?
I think they would be very impressed. Sisi, I have to say, would have to laugh, because Sisi, who had all this tragedy, one of the ways she self-healed was through exercise. And she was considered a complete idiot for getting up in the morning and doing a little gymnastics thing. And then she would, and not eating I don't know if you've ever been to Vienna or Prussia, but they have lunch. They have like these huge lunches. And instead of doing that, she has a little milk and fruit or whatever. And then she would go out riding and all these things that women weren't supposed to do, weren't allowed. Eugénie also loved to hike and ride and everything. So the fact that this has now become part of our culture, I think Elisabeth would really appreciate. Sisi would really appreciate a lot right now, and how far women to come. But they would also tell you, because there's this push-pull, autocracy, democracy, autocracy, democracy.
Yeah.
That is what we are in the middle with now. And the 19th century is so worth reading about, just because they went through everything that we are going through now. And you can see how it turned out in the end. So they would warn that you have to, fight for these rights and privilege, for women's rights and for women's equality and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, really amazing. The parallels, the autocracy, democracy discussion is right at the forefront of everything that we are about today. So, final question for you, Nancy Goldstone. Again, the book is wonderful. Just want to recommend it to everybody.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, the Rebel Empresses, and you write about these women historically. And in your previous books, you've really captured these royals in a very unique way. What keeps you so passionate about telling these wonderful stories?
Oh, I mean, how could you not be? I mean, every woman. I've written about so many different women, and most of them are very inspiring. Even the ones who aren't inspiring, every one of them was absolutely critical to understanding the period in which they lived. But also, they have, routinely they experience the kind of adventures that come out of a Game of Thrones episode.
Yeah.
I mean, they are constantly faced with those challenges. I'm in awe. If there were guns and arrows outside or whatever outside the window, I'd be the first person under the table. They're so brave about it. When I say I could not have endured what Sisi endured, I couldn't have. And Eugénie also just so brave about everything that they were trying to do. And I sit in a little. That's why when biographers or even historians, when we write about these people, we have to remember that we're sitting safely in the archive, or we're sitting safely in our office. Those women were out there, and they did it all, and and these women did it all in the most fabulous gowns with diamonds and pearls in their hair, which I love.
Yeah, yeah. It really says so much. And we appreciate you saying so much to us today. It's just been a pleasure talking with you. Thanks for being so generous. The book again, The Rebel Empresses, Nancy Goldstone. our guest, Smithsonian Associate. We will have links to Nancy's work as well as her upcoming Smithsonian Associates presentation. All those details will be in our show notes. I will say this too, just selfishly, Nancy, please come back as you do more work on this subject. It gets me excited to hear about these stories too. And I know our audience is just going to love this. So congrats.
Please come listen into this seminar because then you can see what they all look like and how beautiful the portraits are and everything.
Yeah, it's going to be a great presentation. I just know it. Thanks, Nancy. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks so much for having me. You too. Bye-bye.
Our thanks to Smithsonian Associate Nancy Goldstone for joining us today and for bringing Elisabeth and Eugénie back into the spotlight, not as ornaments of empire, but as architects of change. You can learn more about the Rebel Empresses and all of Smithsonian Associate Nancy Goldstone's work by visiting our website at notoldbetter.com. There you'll find today's conversation, links to past episodes, and more about our Smithsonian Associates series. Follow us on social media, Twitter @NotOldBetter, and Instagram @NotOldBetter, where we continue the conversation and celebrate stories that honor history, resilience, and reinvention. This is a production of NOBS Studios. I'm Paul Vogelsang. Thanks for spending some time with us today. Be well. Be safe. Let's talk about better. The Not Old Better Show. Join us again next time. Thanks, everybody.